The toll bell rang 3 times before Reuben Slater even looked up from his desk. It was the kind of morning where the mountains looked like they had been painted by a god in a bad mood, all bruised purple and gray above the tree line, the kind of sky that promised weather and delivered on the promise. Reuben had been bent over his ledger at the bridge warden's post, tallying the overnight crossings. 2 timber wagons from Harwick Camp, 1 mule team loaded with copper ore, a trapper with 3 pelts, and an argument about the half-coin rate. He had written it all down in the careful, small hand that his old cartography master Aldous Fenwick had drilled into him back in the city, before life had sent Reuben sideways and north and up into the mountains to take a posting that no one else wanted. The toll bell rang again. Not the single ring of a foot traveler, not the double ring of a mounted rider. 3 rings. Heavy cargo, or a group, or someone who didn't know the protocol and had just kept pulling the rope. He pushed back from the desk, grabbed his warden's sash, a battered strip of orange wool that identified him as a legitimate representative of the Keldrath Mountain Authority, such as it was, and stepped out of the booth onto the bridge deck. She was standing at the near gate. Reuben had seen a lot of things cross the Graven Bridge in his 14 months as its warden. He had seen a wagon full of live chickens tip over the railing. He had seen a pair of merchants come to blows over a disputed load of salt. He had seen a bear once just walking, unbothered, like it had somewhere to be. None of that had prepared him for Urzoth Doomhammer. She was tall, a full head taller than him, and he was not a short man with the deep green complexion common to the Karak Orc clans of the northern ranges. Her lower tusks curved upward in a clean arc, well kept, which told him she was not destitute. Her black hair was braided back in a thick rope that fell past her shoulders, threaded with 2 small copper rings near the ends. She wore a fitted leather bodice, dark brown and laced tight with black cord up the front, over a close-fitted linen shirt in deep charcoal. Her trousers were heavy travel-weight canvas tucked into knee-high boots, and around her waist she wore a broad belt studded with brass, from which hung a short-handled axe on one side and a leather satchel on the other. The bodice was cut to follow her figure without apology, and she wore it like she had never owned a garment she was not completely comfortable in. She was looking at the bridge with the focused, methodical gaze of someone who was not admiring the scenery. She was measuring it. And in her hands, large, capable hands with calloused knuckles, she held a rolled piece of oilskin that he recognized immediately, with a jolt of professional recognition, as a survey map. "Toll rate," she said before he could speak. Her voice was low and clear, with the faint rolling consonants of someone who had learned the common tongue as a second language but had learned it extremely well. "How much for a single crossing with a loaded pack animal and surveying equipment?" 2 copper marks for a person, 1 mark for the animal, no charge for equipment under 50 pounds, Reuben said, because he knew the rates the way he knew his own heartbeat. Then he added, before he could stop himself, "That's a Corrigan survey roll. Where did you get a Corrigan survey roll?" Her dark eyes cut to him with a sharpness that made him feel, briefly, like he had just asked something very stupid. "I made it," she said. He blinked. "You made a Corrigan format. Corrigan did not invent the format," she said flatly. "He standardized it. The Karek have been doing boundary surveys in the Doomhammer ranges for 200 years. I learned the method from our clan's record keeper and refined it on my own. I have been mapping the Upper Graven watershed for the Keldrath Mining Consortium. They hired me. They gave me a contract. I have paperwork if your job requires you to see it." There was a particular tone to the last sentence, not aggressive exactly, but the tone of someone who had been asked to produce paperwork as a substitute for being believed a great many times and was tired of it. Reuben felt heat climb the back of his neck that had nothing to do with the weather. "That won't be necessary," he said, and was surprised to find that he meant it. "I asked about the map roll because I am also a cartographer, or I was, before I took this posting." A pause. The wind off the Graven River moved between them, carrying pine resin and cold water. "You were a cartographer," she repeated, and there was something subtly different in her voice now, not warmer, not colder, just more attentive, like he had said something worth filing away. "Reuben Slater," he said, and held out his hand. "Bridge warden, former apprentice of the Aldous Fenwick studio in Vareth, now mostly a man who counts wagon wheels and argues about toll rates." She looked at his hand for a moment, then she took it. Her grip was firm and direct, no performance in it. "Urzoth Doomhammer," she said. "Current surveyor and mapper of anything the Keldrath Consortium will pay me to document, and some things they will not." He collected her toll. She paid in exact coin. 3 copper marks laid into his palm without searching her belt, meaning she'd already counted it out before she walked up and raised the gate. She led her pack mule across. The animal was loaded with wooden survey stakes, coiled rope, a small theodolite in a padded case, and several more oilskin map rolls. At the midpoint of the bridge, directly above the deepest stretch of the graving, she paused and looked upriver at the peaks. Reuben stood at the gate and watched her. He told himself he was watching to make sure the mule did not get spooked by the water sound below the planks. He was not watching her profile, or the way the morning light did something complicated to the green of her skin, or the steadiness of her gaze when it moved across the mountains. Then she turned her head and caught him watching, and he looked immediately down at his ledger. Behind him, after a moment, he heard the sound of her boots continuing across the bridge toward the far bank, and the soft plodding of the mule behind her. He wrote her name in the ledger with unnecessary precision. The Keldrath Mining Consortium's main operation in the Upper Graving region was called Ironholt Camp, and it sat in a high valley about 4 hours' ride north of the bridge. It was a working settlement of around 200 people, timber workers, ore processors, muleteers, smiths, an apothecary, a cookhouse, a general store, and a tavern that went by the unpromising name of the Broken Seam. There was no mayor, technically, but a man named Oswin Fark served as the consortium site foreman and had the practical authority of one. Reuben knew Ironholt Camp because he made the ride up once a month to deliver the crossing ledger to the consortium's local office and collect his pay. He had no reason to go more often. There was nothing up there for him, particularly. That changed the week after Urzoth Doomhammer crossed his bridge. He had been called up early. Fark had sent a rider down with a message saying there was a dispute about the toll exemption for consortium vehicles, and could the warden come to settle it in person. It was a tedious kind of dispute, the sort that happened when someone with purchasing authority tried to reclassify their private wagon as a company asset to avoid paying the mark. Reuben rode up, settled it in Fark's office in about 20 minutes with reference to the actual contract language, and was heading back to his horse when he heard the argument. It was coming from the open yard in front of the general store, where a crowd of maybe 15 workers had gathered. In the center of the crowd was Urzoth Doomhammer, and she was holding her ground with the specific stillness of someone who has learned that any movement will be read as aggression. Across from her stood a man named Derek Voss, who was Keldrath's chief site surveyor, and who had, apparently, just been informed that the consortium had hired an orc to do independent survey work in the upper ranges. He was making his feelings about this known to the surrounding crowd rather than to Urzoth directly, which was a particular kind of cowardice that Reuben recognized and despised. "No one signed off on this with me," Voss was saying to Fark, who had come out of his office behind Reuben and was now standing at his shoulder looking pained. "An orc running survey work in the Keldrath Ranges. What happens when she hands us a map that puts our mineral claims 300 yards east of where they actually are? What happens when that map goes to the licensing board and we lose a claim worth 40,000 marks because some what?" Urzoth said. Her voice was perfectly level. That was what made everyone in the crowd shift uncomfortably. It was not loud, not threatening, not even particularly cold. It was the voice of someone who had heard the end of that sentence before and had decided that the person speaking would have to say it completely out loud this time, in front of witnesses. Voss stopped. My survey work is accurate to within 2 rods in any direction across terrain up to 50 degrees incline, Urzoth said, into the silence. I can provide reference surveys from the Boreth Pass Boundary Commission and from the Red Crest Silver Camp outside Havenmark, both of which were independently verified. If you would like to see my methodology, I will show it to you. If your concern is professional, I will answer it professionally. She paused. If your concern is something else, I suggest you think carefully about whether Keldrath Consortium's contract terms allow for that particular kind of objection. They did not. Reuben had read those contract terms once out of boredom, on a slow crossing day. The consortium had a non-discrimination clause written into every employment agreement because they operated on disputed borderland and could not afford the legal complications of anything else. Voss knew it too, apparently, because he went red and looked at Fark, and Fark made a very small gesture that meant, essentially, "This is not my problem." The crowd began to break up. Urzoth turned away from Voss with the deliberate unhaste of someone who refuses to appear to retreat. Her gaze moved across the yard and landed on Reuben, who was standing near the edge of the crowd with his horse's reins in one hand and what he suspected was a fairly transparent look of honest admiration on his face. She raised an eyebrow. "The bridge warden," she said. "Reuben," he said. "I was here about a toll dispute. I'm apparently also witnessing whatever this was." "An old argument in a new location," she said, and something in her jaw shifted, not quite a smile, but the muscles that lived near a smile. "Are you staying in camp tonight or heading back down?" "Back down, probably." "I have a meeting with Fark about the upper range survey boundaries tomorrow morning," she said. "I rode up last night and I am sleeping at the camp. The cookhouse does passable food if you are hungry before you go." It was not an invitation exactly. It was a statement of fact that happened to include a door he could walk through if he chose to. He chose to. They ate at one of the long tables in the cookhouse, iron kettles of bean stew with salt pork, hard bread, and an end-of-day bitterness in the tea that suggested it had been sitting since noon. Around them the camp workers came and went, and more than a few of them looked at the table where the human man in the warden's sash was sitting across from the orc woman with the survey map unrolled between their bowls. Reuben did not look back at them. He was too busy looking at the map. It was, genuinely, the best independent survey work he had seen since leaving Vareth. The detail in the upper canyon sections was extraordinary micro-elevations marked in the Corrigan notation, drainage paths identified, mineral seam indicators noted in a small, careful secondary hand that was different from the main survey notation, which meant she had a system of layered annotation he had not seen anyone use outside of a professional studio. "This drainage path," he said, pointing. "You have marked it as seasonal. It runs from the northeast snowpack," she said. "Feeds the upper Graven tributary May through August, dry the rest of the year. The mining operations need to know because 2 of the proposed shaft sites are in the dry bed. If they sink those shafts without accounting for the seasonal flood load, the lower one collapses in year 3, yes," she said. "I have noted it in the survey addendum. Fark has not read the addendum." She tapped the margin of the map with one finger and her knuckle grazed the side of his hand and neither of them moved away. "He will read it if the bridge warden mentions it to him," Reuben said. Her eyes came up from the map. "You would do that," she said. It was not quite a question. "I would do it because it is true and the camp needs to know," he said honestly. "But yes, also because you drew this map, and someone who draws maps this well deserves to have the addendum read." A silence fell between them that was different from the silences before, fuller, warmer, slightly precarious the way the edge of a riverbank can feel when the water is high. "Why are you a bridge warden," she said, not unkindly, "if you map like you read maps?" He did not answer immediately. He picked up his bread and broke it. "I had a partnership. In Vareth. Cartography Studio 6 mappers. One of my partners made some financial decisions I did not know about, and when the debt came due, it came due on all of us. I lost my share. The others, the ones who had family, money, or other backing, recovered. I didn't. He looked at the map rather than at her. The Keldreth posting came up. Decent pay, no one wanted it because it is remote. I know the mountain country from survey work, so he shrugged. Bridge warden. How long? 14 months. Do you miss it, the mapping? Every day, he said, and the honesty of it surprised him a little. The way things you have been avoiding surprise you when they come out. Urzoth was quiet for a moment. Then she rolled the survey map back up with the practiced economy of someone who has done it 10,000 times, and set it in the carry tube at her side. I am going into the upper ranges next week, she said. The north face of the Veth Bren Massif. The consortium wants it surveyed for a potential access road. It is approximately 12 days of work, and I will be alone except for the mule. She paused. The work would go faster with a second pair of hands to hold stakes and record ancillary notation. He looked at her. Are you asking me to come? The bridge warden cannot leave his post, she said, meeting his eyes. But if he wanted to take his accumulated leave allotment, which I suspect he has not used in 14 months, the gate can be locked for 2 weeks without it being a violation of his contract. I checked the Keldreth employment terms on the way up. The not-quite smile was there again, more visible now. I may have checked them before I came to camp. Reuben looked at this woman across a rough wooden table in a mining camp cookhouse at the top of the world, and felt something move in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Not just attraction, though that was certainly there, sharp and immediate and impossible to pretend otherwise. Something older than attraction. The feeling of being seen by someone who looked carefully before they decided. I will speak to Fark in the morning, he said. They left 4 days later, in the early gray before sunrise, Reuben's horse loaded with his personal survey kit, the one he had kept, even through the Vareth disaster, even when he could have sold it. Because some things you do not sell, and Urzoth's mule loaded with the full survey equipment. The path up into the Veth Bren Massif left the main camp road after the first hour and became a series of switchbacks through old-growth pine that the timber crews had not reached yet. The first day was all work and no conversation beyond what the work required. Hold the stake here, read the angle, mark that bluff face, I will note the overhang. They moved in a rhythm that emerged without discussion, the way it does when two people who both know what they are doing happen to be doing the same thing together for the first time and discover, with low-grade surprise, that they fit. At the end of the first day, they made camp at a high shelf of rock above the tree line with the whole Graven Valley below them, and the sky turning copper and violet over the eastern ranges. Reuben boiled water for the camp stove and made trail soup, dried meat, dried onion, hard lentils, while Urzoth spread the day's survey notes on the flat rock and cross-referenced them against the existing partial maps. Her copper hair rings caught the dying light and threw small arcs of brightness against the rock. The consortium's existing map of this area is wrong, she said, without looking up. By how much depends on whether this is a surveying error or a deliberate misdraw. Misdraw for what purpose? To put the primary access road route through land that is currently under a secondary claim held by someone named Herrick Voss. She looked up. Who is the foreman's wife's uncle? Reuben set down the spoon he was stirring with. Derek Voss. And Herrick Voss, she said. They are brothers. One is the chief surveyor, one holds a secondary mineral claim on the eastern slope. An access road through that claim would require the consortium to purchase it, likely at a price well above its actual value. She turned the existing map toward him. This error here, this 300-yard displacement of the ridgeline sends the road exactly through Herrick Voss's claim. Reuben looked at the map. Then he looked at her survey notes from the day. This is going to cause trouble when you show Fark. It is going to cause a great deal of trouble, she agreed, and went back to writing. He watched her profile in the firelight and thought about the way she had said it, not with alarm, not with resignation, but with the matter-of-fact preparedness of someone who factors trouble into their plans at the outset. Are you not worried? He asked. "Of course I am worried," she said, still writing. "I just do not let it stop the work." They ate the trail soup in companionable silence. The stars came out above the massif, in the particular profusion that only appears above 4,000 feet, and the wind dropped to nothing. At some point, without either of them marking the transition, the silence shifted from the silence of colleagues after a long day to the silence of two people who are comfortable enough with each other to stop performing. "Tell me about the Doomhammer ranges," Reuben said eventually. She looked up from where she was sharpening a survey stake with a small knife. "What about them?" "The name. Your family name is the same as the range north of here. Were you named for it, or was it named for neither?" she said. The Doomhammer clan settled in those ranges before there was a common tongue name for them. The ranges were always called the same thing. In Karek it is Vorzumal, which means approximately the place where the hammers sound, because of the thunder echoes in the central valleys. When the first Keldreth surveyors came up and asked my great-grandmother's sister what the mountains were called, she told them and they wrote down a translation. Urzoth set down the stake. But the actual clan name, the Doomhammer name, that is much older than the ranges. It comes from a weapon, an ancestor. The weapon has been lost for 4 generations, but the name stays. "Do you know where the weapon was lost?" The question seemed to amuse her. "Somewhere in the Vorzumal," she said. "Which is part of why I agreed to survey them." A pause. "I have been looking in my own time for 3 seasons now. Have you found anything?" "I found a cave system on the 3rd season that has markings consistent with my ancestors' period," she said. "I have not told the consortium about it. It is not on any survey I have submitted to them." She said it with a direct, measured quality that was not an apology. "Good," Reuben said immediately. She looked at him with that particular attentiveness again. "Good. That cave is none of their business," he said. "A family thing is a family thing. The consortium does not own your history just because they are paying for your survey hours." The knife had stopped moving. She was watching him in a way that made him feel exposed and steadied at the same time, which was a combination he did not have a ready category for. "You are a strange person, Reuben Slater," she said. "Probably," he said. "The soup is getting cold." She smiled then, not the not-quite smile, but the full one, brief and brilliant and somehow more startling than he had expected. He did not sleep particularly well that night, but it was not because anything was wrong. On the 5th day of the survey, they came around the north face of the Veth Bren above the tree line, and walked into a view that stopped Reuben in the middle of a step. The full northern range opened in front of them, the Vorzumal, the Doomhammer ranges, rising in a series of granite massifs that went north and west as far as sight extended, the light hitting each differently so that the peaks ranged in color from pale bone to deep iron to something almost red. He had been up in the mountains for over a year. He had thought he had seen the ranges. He had not seen them like this, from this angle in this light, with this particular quality of cold in the air that made each peak stand out like it had been cut from separate stone. He stood with his survey notebook open and his pencil still, and he did not write anything. Urzoth came up beside him. She had been 20 yards behind him, checking the theodolite reading, and had come forward to see what had stopped him. She stood at his shoulder, slightly taller, and looked at the ranges. "What are these called?" he said. He meant the specific peaks in the middle distance, the ones that the existing Keldreth maps had labeled only with letter-number survey codes. "The individual ones, do they have names?" "Karek names, yes," she said. "Keldreth has not bothered to record them." He opened his notebook to a fresh page. "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, then pointed at the leftmost peak, the tallest one, the one with the permanent ice cap and the distinct double summit ridge. "That one the clan calls Zerkoth. It means the old one who does not move. The name is because in the old stories it was the place where the first Karek ancestor sat down to rest after crossing the northern plains and decided not to go any further." Reuben wrote it down. Zerkoth. He wrote it in his careful cartographer's hand, and then in a smaller notation beside it he wrote the translation and the source. He had been doing this since his first week in the mountains, writing down what the locals called things, what they knew in the margins of the survey sheets. And it was one of the many ways in which the bridge warden's job was quietly also a cartographic one, whether anyone paid him for it or not. "Keep going," he said. She pointed at each peak in sequence from west to east and named them, and told him what the names meant in Karak, and Reuben wrote every one down. It took nearly an hour, and at some point they both sat down on a flat rock without deciding to, because they were not going anywhere and their feet deserved a rest. The wind was absent and the sun was warm in the specific way of high-elevation autumn, where the warmth is real but the cold is only one cloud away. "This one," Reuben said, pointing at a peak he had not been told the name of yet, a medium peak, not the tallest, not the most dramatic, but with an unusual profile. A long sweeping west face and a steep, almost vertical east face, so that depending on the direction you looked it seemed like two entirely different mountains. Urzoth looked at it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a tone that seemed to surprise her slightly even as she said it, "Slather Cone." And then, before he could ask, "It means approximately the man who is more than he seems from the front." A silence. Reuben looked at the peak, then at her. She was looking at the peak, not at him, and the green of her skin had deepened slightly around the cheekbones in a way that he had come to associate, over 5 days of close observation, with something she was not quite ready to say directly. "You made that up," he said quietly. "I did not," she said, which was technically accurate because she had made it up right then in the moment, but since it had not existed before that moment it was also technically true that she had not made it up in the sense of fabricating a prior falsehood. "It is a Karak name. I gave it one." He looked back at the peak. The east face caught the afternoon light and threw it back in a clear silver. The west face was in shadow, complex and layered. "Slater Cone," he said. "Slather Cone," she corrected, with the particular precision of someone who speaks a language that matters to them. "The first syllable has a soft stop." "Slather Cone," he repeated more carefully. "Better," she said. He wrote it in the notebook. He wrote the Karak and the translation and the source. Urzoth Doomhammer, Survey Expedition Veth Bren North Face, year 34 of the Keldrath Charter. He wrote it in his small, careful hand, and the peak had a name, and the name was him, and she was looking out at the ranges with a deliberate focus that was almost but not quite successfully hiding something. He made a decision. He set down the notebook and turned toward her and said, very directly, because he was 31 years old and had lost enough things to know that hesitation is its own kind of loss, "Urzoth." She turned her head. He kissed her. It was not a long kiss, and it was not particularly graceful. They were sitting on a rock at 4,000 feet with survey equipment in their laps. But it was honest, and she went still for about 1 second in the way of someone who did not expect it and is rapidly recalibrating. And then she kissed him back with a thoroughness that made him grip the edge of the rock. When they broke apart, she looked at him steadily, and there was something in her expression that he did not have words for, something that looked like relief, which seemed like the wrong word and also exactly the right one. "You," she said, "are very bad at waiting." "I have been told," he said. "Good," she said, and kissed him again. The trouble that Urzoth had predicted materialized on their 8th day in the ranges. When they came back down to resupply at a supply cache the consortium maintained at a waypoint they called the mid-shelter, a rough linta with a locked box of preserved food and a logbook that camp riders checked twice a week. There was a message in the logbook. Fark's handwriting, short and stiff. "Return to Ironholt Camp before completing upper range survey. Survey contract under review. Report to foreman's office." Urzoth read it twice. Her expression did not change, but her jaw set in a way Reuben had come to read. "Vas," he said. "Vas," she agreed. They packed up and rode down. The confrontation in Fark's office the following morning was the kind of meeting that everyone in the room except Reuben and Urzoth already knew the conclusion to. Derek Voss had filed a formal complaint with the consortium's regional administrator, questioning Urzoth's credentials and, more pointedly, questioning the accuracy of the preliminary survey sections she had already submitted. The regional administrator, a man named Pelwick, who came up from the lowland offices once a quarter and had never spent a night at elevation in his life, had responded by ordering a contract review. Pelwick was in the room. He was red-faced, overdressed for the altitude, and nervous in the way of men who are doing something they know is slightly wrong but have been told it is politically necessary. The preliminary sections show significant divergence from the existing Cartographer baseline maps, Pelwick said, addressing the air somewhere between Urzoth and the wall behind her. Because the existing baseline maps are wrong, Urzoth said. That is a serious allegation. It is a serious error, she said. I have the survey notes. I have the theodolite readings. I can walk anyone in this room through each deviation and show them the physical evidence at the site. The ridge line displacement in Section 4B of the existing map misrepresents the terrain by 312 yards to the east, which coincidentally places a proposed access road through a secondary mineral claim held by a person named Herrick Voss. The room went very quiet. Pelwick looked at Derek Voss. Derek Voss looked at the floor. Fark looked at the ceiling. Reuben, who was standing to Urzoth's right because he had walked into this room with her and had no intention of standing anywhere else, said, in the calm and measured voice of someone who has spent 14 months dealing with disputes by sticking to documented fact, I have been assisting with the survey work as a secondary recorder. I can corroborate every reading in Miss Doomhammer's field notes. I'm also prepared to provide, as a formal affidavit to the Cartographer Regional Office, a record of the toll crossing logs from the Graven Bridge going back to my appointment, which will show that survey equipment and personnel associated with the eastern claim of Herrick Voss have crossed the bridge in the months preceding Miss Doomhammer's appointment, consistent with someone checking landmarkers before a planned road alignment. He paused. I thought I would mention that. The silence this time had a different texture. No one is questioning anyone's work, Pelwick said, in the tone of a man performing a rapid strategic retreat. A review is a standard procedure. Initiate the review, Urzoth said. I welcome it, but I will not pause the survey while it proceeds. I have a contract completion date and I intend to meet it. She picked up her survey tube and stood. Mr. Slater, I believe we have work to do. They walked out of the office. Behind them, through the closed door, Reuben could hear the beginnings of a conversation that was going to be very uncomfortable for Derek Voss. Outside in the camp yard, in the broad morning light with half the camp watching them from various distances, Urzoth stopped walking and stood still for a moment with her face turned slightly up toward the sun, eyes closed, just breathing. Reuben stood beside her and waited. Thank you, she said without opening her eyes, for the toll crossing records. I have them all written in the ledger, he said. 14 months every crossing with cargo and purpose. It is my job. You knew what it meant when I told you about the road alignment. I put it together about an hour after you told me, yes. She opened her eyes and looked at him sidelong. You have been sitting on that for 3 days. I was waiting for the right moment, he said. Apparently it was this one. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was a cousin of one. Then she looked at the watching camp workers with the direct, unhurried gaze of someone who has decided not to be invisible. Shall we? She said. They went back to the mountains. The survey was completed over the following 6 days. It was, from a professional standpoint, among the best work Reuben had ever been part of. Urzoth's methodology was precise and rigorous, and having a second trained hand for the recordings meant that she was able to cover ground at a pace that would otherwise have required a 3-person team. From a personal standpoint, it was also the most alive he had felt in longer than he could precisely calculate. They talked while they worked, the way people talk when their hands are busy and their guard is down, about everything and nothing, about the history of the Karak Ranges and the politics of the Cartographer Consortium, and the particular challenges of maintaining accurate elevation records in an area with variable magnetic variation, and also about smaller things, personal things, the kind of things that accumulate meaning through repetition and become, eventually, the texture of knowing someone. She told him about her mother, who had been the clan's primary mapkeeper before her, and who had died 3 winters ago of a fever that a better supplied healer could have treated. She told him about the way the Karak marked a significant decision, not in ceremony but in action, because a word spoken was not a thing, but a step taken was. She told him about the 3 seasons of looking for the Doomhammer ancestors' cave, and about finding it on a day when she had almost turned back because of weather, and about sitting inside it for an hour with the markings on the walls around her, which were not a weapon, and were not instructions to a weapon but were a family history, carved in old Karak script that she could read, that no one had read in perhaps 150 years. He told her about the studio in Vareth, and about the partner who had bankrupted them, and about the particular grief of losing something you were good at in a way that was not your fault, and yet still felt like failure. He told her about the 14 months at the bridge, which had been lonely in a way he had not admitted to anyone, because there was no one to admit it to. He told her about Aldous Fenwick, his old master, who had taught him that a map was not a territory but a conversation between the mapmaker and the land, and that the conversation required honesty on both sides. At night, they made camp and shared food and sat close enough that their shoulders touched. On the 9th night it rained, a cold, sideways mountain rain that flooded the tent seam and flooded the outer vestibule, and they spent 2 hours rebuilding the camp arrangement by lantern light, both soaked, and laughing at the absurdity of it in a way that turned into something else, and the 10th night was the one that made all the subsequent nights different. He did not sleep badly on any of those nights. They came back down to Ironholt Camp on the 12th day, with a complete survey of the Veth Bren North Face, a full correction of the Section 4B baseline, and a formal report on the access road alignment that Reuben had helped Urzoth draft by firelight on the 11th night. The report was exhaustive and professionally worded and contained, in an appendix, the complete toll-crossing records that Reuben had memorized from his own ledger, organized to show the pattern of Herrick Voss's pre-appointment visits. Fark received the report. Pelwick, who was still in camp, read it. Derek Voss was notably absent from the cookhouse that evening and from the office yard the following morning. On the 3rd day after their return, Pelwick called a meeting in the main cookhouse that most of the camp attended, because word had gotten around that something significant was happening. He stood at the front of the room and read from a prepared statement. Reuben could tell it was prepared because Pelwick was not a prepared statement kind of man, and the language was too precise, announcing that the Keldreth Consortium was accepting the revised survey in full, that the Section 4B baseline would be corrected on all official consortium maps, and that the proposed Eastern Access Road alignment was being withdrawn pending a full review of the mineral claims. He did not say Derek Voss's name. He did not need to. In the back of the room, Urzoth stood with her arms folded and her face composed, and only Reuben, standing beside her, could see the small, controlled exhale that meant relief. Then Pelwick said one more thing. He said that the Keldreth Consortium, in recognition of the significance of the survey work done in the upper ranges, was offering Miss Doomhammer Urzoth a full-time senior surveyor position with the regional office, at a salary 3 times what the contract rate had been, with full authority over the Northern Range Survey Program. The room went very quiet again. Reuben looked at Urzoth. She looked at him. Her expression was unreadable for once. Like several things were happening behind it simultaneously, and she had not yet decided which one to let out. "I will consider it," she said to Pelwick. "Of course," Pelwick said. She walked out. Reuben followed. Outside in the yard the wind was off the ranges and carried the first real cold of coming winter, the kind of cold that smells different from autumn cold that has stone in it. "That is a significant offer," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is that a problem?" She looked at the mountains. "The senior surveyor position requires me to be based at the consortium's district office," she said. In Harwick, which is 2 days' ride from here. She paused. Not 4 hours. He understood what she was not saying. He had a job at the bridge. He had a contract. She was being offered a different life, a better one financially and professionally, and it was in a different place. When do you need to decide? He said. 2 weeks. Then let's not decide anything today, he said. Let's eat something first. She laughed. Actually laughed, a full, real sound that he had only heard twice before and that he was already learning to store carefully. You always want to eat first. I think better on a full stomach, he said. Always have. She looked at him, and in the broad camp yard with workers passing behind them and the mountains over her shoulder, she reached out and took his hand just briefly, just her fingers closing around his with a grip that was steady and deliberate and chosen. Then she let go and walked toward the cookhouse. He stood there for a moment, looking at his hand. The 2 weeks that followed were not quiet ones. Reuben went back to the bridge after 3 days in camp. He had taken his full leave and his post needed him. The first week he sat in the toll booth and thought about the fact that Urzoth was 4 hours up the road making a decision that would shape both their lives, and there was nothing for him to do about it except wait. He counted wagon wheels and recorded cargo weights and argued about the half-coin rate, and told himself that he was not the kind of man who assumed that another person's life choices were his to direct. He was also, he admitted to himself on a slow Wednesday with no crossings, the kind of man who was deeply and sincerely hoping she would find a reason to choose the thing that kept her close. On the 9th day, she came across the bridge in the late afternoon, the mule loaded differently than before, lighter on survey equipment, heavier on general provisions, and with a larger pack on the mule's back that had the shape of a sleeping roll and personal effects rather than professional gear. He was out of the booth before the bell stopped ringing. She stopped at the gate and looked at him, and her expression was the one he was learning to read as hers, settled, certain, with something warm underneath the certainty. I declined the Harwick position, she said. He kept his face level. Why? Because I am a self-employed contractor and the northern ranges are my territory and I do not want to work for Pelwick, she said. The consortium can hire me range survey by range survey. I will keep the rate I have been charging. She paused. Also because I know where the Doomhammer ancestors' cave is and that knowledge belongs here in this range, not 2 days' ride south. Those are all good reasons, he said carefully. They are professional reasons, she said. I also have a personal reason. She reached into the satchel on her belt and pulled out a rolled piece of paper. She unrolled it and held it up. It was a map. A small one, hand-drawn, and he recognized the hand immediately because he knew it as well as his own by now. It was a detailed map of the northern ranges, the peaks, the valleys, the drainage paths, all labeled in Karak with the names she had given him on the north face of the Veth Bren. All labeled except one peak, the one in the middle distance with the long sweeping west face and the steep east face. That one had 2 labels, the Karak label she had given it in the moment, and below it in the smaller notation hand she used for secondary information, in common tongue, Slater's Peak. He looked at the map for a long moment. You put it on an official survey record, he said. I put it in my personal records, she said. The ones that are mine. The consortium's maps do not need to know everything. She held the map out to him. He took it. He held it carefully. The way you hold something you know is going to matter for a long time. I told you the Karak marks significant things by action, not by words, she said. She was watching him with a directness that was simultaneously the most comfortable and most exposed feeling he had ever experienced. This is an action. It is a very clear action, he said. I thought you would appreciate clarity, she said. You are a map maker. He folded the map with careful precision and tucked it inside his coat, against his chest. I have a small house, he said, behind the toll booth. It has a second room that is currently being used to store my survey equipment. I could clear the survey equipment out. I have a mule and several hundred pounds of cartographic tools, she said. I will need somewhere to work. There is a barn, he said. Not much of one, but the roof is sound. It will do. He opened the gate. She walked through, and the mule walked through behind her. And as she passed him, she was close enough that he caught the smell of pine resin and cold air and the faint warmth underneath that was entirely her. And he put his hand at the small of her back for just a moment, light and certain. She looked sideways at him, and the full smile was there. 3 weeks later, the wager nearly destroyed everything. It started in the Broken Seam Tavern at Ironholt Camp, on a late afternoon when Reuben had ridden up to deliver the monthly ledger and Urzoth had come up to present her next survey proposal to Fark. Derek Voss had been quietly transferred to a lower elevation posting in the wake of the road alignment scandal, which should have meant the hostility had gone with him. It had not. Some of it had remained, distributed among the camp workers who had liked Voss, and more of it had come up from somewhere older and less specific, the kind of prejudice that does not need a particular person to carry it, that lives in a room like damp in wood. There was a man named Callan Bryce, who was one of Keldrath's or Assyr's and who was, by general camp consensus, the best drinker in Ironholt and one of the worst losers at cards. He had been at a corner table when Reuben and Urzoth came in for an evening meal, and he had been drinking since before dark. The comment he made was not creative. It was the kind of comment that drunk men with small minds make about a human man who keeps company with an orc woman, the implication that the human must be weak, or desperate, or wrong in some fundamental way. He made it to the 3 men at his table, but loudly enough that the room could hear, which was the point. Reuben set down his cup. Urzoth put her hand on his arm, which he understood to mean, "I have heard this before. Do not do something that will make your life difficult on my behalf." He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face. Then he looked at Callan Bryce. "Say it again," Reuben said, in the voice that was not loud and not soft and that had something in it that made the room go careful. Clearly, so everyone can hear the actual words. Bryce looked up. He was drunk, but not so drunk that he had lost the animal instinct for reading rooms, and the room was very still. "I was talking to my friends," he said. "You were talking loud enough for me to hear," Reuben said. "So say it again so I can hear it clearly." Bryce stood up, which was a mistake, because standing up meant he had committed to something. He was a broad man, half a head taller than Reuben, and he straightened up with the unstable confidence of someone who has spent his life using size as an argument. "I said," Bryce said, "that a man who keeps house with an orc bitch must not have many options." Urzoth went absolutely still beside him, not with shock, she had heard worse, but with the stillness of someone deciding very quickly which of several possible responses to choose. She did not get to choose, because Reuben had already set down his cup carefully, turned his stool sideways, and said in the same level voice, "That is a fighting word where I was raised. If you want to be a coward about it, you can apologize now. If you want to settle it properly, I am suggesting a contest so the camp can watch and you can try to save some face in the process. Your choice." Bryce stared at him. The room stared at both of them. "What kind of contest?" Bryce said, which was how you said yes when you could not afford to say yes but also could not afford to back down. The camp boss Fark, who was 3 tables away with his own drink, said, wearily but clearly, "Whatever it is, do it outside and don't break anything." Reuben looked at the room. He looked at Urzoth, who was watching him with an expression that was fully unreadable and fully focused, and which he could not interpret at all. "Survey a landmark," he said. "I pick a feature. We each take a theodolite and record the bearing, elevation, and position. The camp surveyor, not me, not Urzoth, one of Keldrath's own staff, checks both sets of readings. Whoever is more accurate wins." A pause. "Wins what?" someone from the back said. "Wins the right to have said the better thing tonight," Reuben said. "And Bryce buys the whole room around if he loses." He looked at Bryce. "If I lose, I'll buy." Bryce was a man who had been challenged on ground he did not expect, which was an unfamiliar feeling, and he covered it by laughing as though this were an obvious joke. "You want to survey something tonight in the dark to prove a point about an orc woman." "I want to survey something tonight," Reuben said, "to give you an opportunity to either win or show the camp exactly how much your opinion is worth." The room was very quiet. Fark rubbed his face. Three of Bryce's friends looked at each other. Then, from behind Reuben, Urzoth said, quietly and clearly, "I would like to add a condition." Everyone looked at her. She looked at Bryce with the specific quality of directness that she had shown in the yard that first day, not aggressive, but present and complete, the look of someone who has decided to be entirely visible. "If Reuben wins," she said, "you also say what you intended to say, clearly, in front of the whole camp, but this time to me. Not to your table." She paused, "so I can respond." The silence stretched. Bryce looked at the room looked back at him. There was a very specific expression on several faces, the expression of people who work hard and are tired and do not particularly enjoy being the audience for this kind of thing, and who have just realized that the orc surveyor who had exposed Derek Voss's map fraud and saved two of those shaft sites from collapse was standing in their cookhouse offering a man a fair fight, which was more fairness than he deserved. "Fine," Bryce said. "Fine." They went outside. The whole camp came. Fark produced 2 theodolites from the survey shed. He chose the landmark himself, the camp's survey stake at the base of the main or road, a permanent marker whose exact coordinates were recorded in the consortium's formal documents. Each man would take readings from the same reference point, and the camp's junior surveyor, a young man named Aldeck who had nothing to do with the Voss situation and was therefore trustworthy, would compare the readings against the known values. Bryce went first. He was a confident man and he had watched surveyors work for years and he knew the motions roughly. He set the instrument up, leveled it, took his readings, recorded them in the notebook Fark gave him. It took him about 15 minutes. His numbers were in the notebook. Reuben went second. He had not touched a theodolite in a formal setting in over a year, but the hands remember what they have done 10,000 times. He set it up efficiently without theatrics, leveled the instrument by feel and bubble, sighted the stake, took the bearing, verified it, took the elevation reading, cross-checked it against the horizon reference, and recorded his numbers in 4 minutes. There was a murmur from the watching camp. Aldeck took both notebooks and the reference document into the lamplight and checked. It took him about 3 minutes. He came back out. He said, reading from the paper, that Bryce's bearing reading was off by 4 degrees and his elevation by 2.5. He said that Slater's bearing reading was exact and his elevation was off by less than 1/4 degree. The camp breathed out. Bryce stood in the lamplight with everyone watching him. His face was the color of old mortar. Reuben did not look at Bryce. He looked at Urzoth. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, arms folded, and she was looking back at him with that focused, attentive expression, and underneath it something that he thought, that he was increasingly sure, was the particular warmth of someone watching a person they have chosen, prove that they chose correctly. Bryce said what he had said, quietly, to Urzoth. He said it without the volume of a moment ago and without the audience-playing quality, and when he had finished Urzoth looked at him for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that the whole camp could hear, with the clarity of someone who has decided to be definitive rather than defensive, "The difference between a person like Reuben Slater and a person like you is that he does not need me to be less than what I am for him to feel like what he is. That is all." She turned away from Bryce and walked back toward the tavern. Reuben stood in the yard a moment longer, then followed. Behind him, someone in the crowd started a slow clap. It was joined by 2 others, then a dozen. He did not turn around, but he could hear it, and it was not for him. It was for her. After that night something shifted in the camp's relationship to Urzoth. Not to unanimity. There were still men who would not meet her eyes and women who moved to other tables. But the active hostility had been lanced. The way a wound is not healed by lancing, but at least given a chance. The workers who had watched her expose the Voss road fraud and then watched her stand in the lamplight and say what she had said were, in the private accountancy of hard-living working people, reconciled to her presence in a way they had not been before. Fark, who had the pragmatism common to men who run difficult operations in remote places, began to treat her with the matter-of-fact professional respect he gave to anyone who did their job well and did not cause him extra problems. He offered her the use of the camp's survey shed as a workspace when she was up the road, which she accepted without ceremony. Reuben rode up more often. Not because there was always a reason to, but because the reasons tended to materialize when he was there, and because the house behind the toll booth was a fine enough place to live alone and a much better place to return to. She had cleared a corner of the small second room and set up her drafting table there, a portable one, the kind that folded flat for transport, with the legs worn smooth by travel. In the evenings she drew maps by lamplight, and he sat nearby with whatever project he had taken on, and the silence between them was the warmth of two people in a shared space who no longer needed to fill the air to prove they were comfortable. He had started working on the mountain survey names in earnest. After the north face of Veth Bren, he had asked Urzoth to help him compile a complete index of Karak place names in the northern ranges, not for the consortium, but for a proper record. She had begun spending 1 or 2 evenings a week dictating names to him, while he drew the master reference map, a large format sheet that was becoming, slowly, the most detailed and authentic survey of the Doomhammer ranges ever made in the common tongue. The work had a quality that he recognized as important in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction. "You are making a document that your clan will be able to use," he told her one evening, when the lamp was low and the map was spread between them. "When the consortium's records refer to this range in 50 years, if this map is in the archive, the Karak names will be in the formal record. It will be harder to erase." She looked at the map for a long time. "My mother would have wanted this," she said. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve on what was already present. He had written in, over the weeks of work, more than 40 Karak place names across the northern ranges. Each one had its translation, its source, its story, annotated in his small, careful hand. The mountains had a history now, written in the common tongue, in the hand of a man who had learned to listen. In the center of the range, on the peak with the long west face and the steep east face, the label read, "Slather Cone, she who sees what is there." He had changed the translation. She had seen it one evening when she came to look over his shoulder at the progress, and had gone still for a moment. "You changed it," she said. "The original translation was the man who is more than he seems from the front," he said, without looking up from the notation he was completing. "That is a fine name. But I thought about it, and the mountain does not look different from the front and the back because it is hiding something. It looks different because from different directions it shows different things. That is not deception." He set down his pen. "That is just a mountain that has more to show than one view can capture." She was quiet. "It deserves to be named for someone like that," he said. "Reuben," she said. "I am not changing it back," he said. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head with a directness that was so completely herself that he felt it in his sternum. "I was not going to ask you to," she said. The final threat came from an unexpected direction. In the middle of the following month, a rider arrived at the Graven Bridge with a formal document from the Keldrath Consortium's Central Administrative Office in Vareth, the city Reuben had come from, a fact he registered with a specific, unhappy irony. The document informed the bridge warden that the Graven Bridge tolling contract was being restructured, and that as part of the restructuring, the warden position was being reclassified as a seasonal posting rather than a permanent one. The current holder's contract would expire at year's end and not be renewed. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his desk drawer and went back to counting wagons. He did not tell Urzoth for 2 days. He was not trying to hide it from her exactly, but he needed to think before he spoke, and thinking while maintaining the appearance of normal function was something he had gotten good at in the Vareth years. She found out on the 3rd day when she came down from the camp with a completed survey section and found him burning his toll booth furniture in the yard behind the bridge post. Not all of it, just the pieces he had specifically disliked. She stopped her mule at the edge of the light and looked at the fire. "What are you doing?" she said. "Clearing out," he said. "Clearing out why?" he told her. He told her in the straightforward way, all at once, because he had had 2 days to come to terms with it, and there was no use in half telling her anything. The contract was ending. The position was seasonal starting in the new year. He needed to find work elsewhere. She sat on her mule and listened to all of it. Her face was still, and he could not read the stillness, and he hated not being able to read it because he had spent months learning to. "Where will you go?" she said. "I do not know yet," he said honestly. "Harwick is 2 days south," she said. "The consortium's district office, where they offered me the senior position I declined." A pause. "Urzoth, I declined it because I wanted to be here," she said, "not because I could not work from Harwick. Surveying is surveying. The ranges are 3 hours north of Harwick or 4 hours north of here. The difference is 1 hour and the quality of the accommodation." She looked at him steadily. "Harwick is also large enough to support an independent cartography studio, one that publishes proper range surveys with Carrack annotations." He stood by the fire and looked at her. "You looked up Harwick's commercial licensing," he said. "I looked up everything the morning I found out the consortium was taking the contract north," she said. "When did you find out?" 3 days ago. "I found out 2 days ago," she said. "When Fark mentioned it to me because he did not know if you had received the document yet. A beat. I have been waiting for you to tell me." He breathed. The fire was warm on his left side and the night was cold on his right. "I did not want it to sound like I was asking you to change your life again." She got off the mule with the smooth economy of someone who has ridden in mountains for years and walked toward him until she was close enough that he had to look up at her, which was one of the things about her height that he had come to love without ever deciding to the specific tilt of looking up, the specific scale of her. "Let me be clear about something," she said. "I named a mountain after you. I did it without thinking, and I would do it again. I carry your initial on my survey rolls as a secondary recorder. I spend more nights in your house than I spend in camp, and I have made exactly one decision about my professional life since I crossed this bridge. I declined a better paying position so I would not be 2 days away from you." She paused. "Those are not the actions of a person who needs to be protected from having her life changed." He looked at her in the firelight. "Those are the actions of a person who has made choices," she said. "My choices. You did not ask me to make them. I made them because I wanted to." She put her hand on the side of his face, large and warm, and he turned into it slightly the way a compass needle turns. "You have been trying since we met to be careful about taking up space in my life. I am telling you to stop." "I am trying," he said, "to be worth what you are offering." "You already are," she said with the simplicity of someone stating a fact. "You have been from the beginning. You stood in Fark's office and cited toll crossing records. You named a mountain after what you see when you look at me. You called a man out in front of a camp full of people because of one word." She searched his face. "You see me, Reuben, that is the whole of it. You see me exactly as I am and you think it is good. Do you know how rare that is?" He had no answer for that felt adequate. "Come to Harwick," she said. "Open the studio, put your name on it and mine beside it. We will survey the ranges properly together, and the map we have been making will be published as a formal document under both our names. And in 50 years, when the consortium looks at the Doomhammer ranges in the record, they will see them named correctly." She paused. "And they will see both our names on the work." He covered her hand on his face with his own. "You planned all of this," he said. "I plan things," she said. "It is what cartographers do." He laughed. He could not help it. It was the only thing that felt proportionate to the moment. "All right," he said. "All right. All right," he said. "Harwick, the studio, both our names." He turned his hand to catch hers properly. "I need about a week to end the contract correctly. I do not leave messes." "I know you do not," she said. "That is one of the things I counted on." He pulled her down toward him by their joined hands and kissed her with the full relief of someone who has been holding a weight and has been told, finally, that he can set it down. She kissed him back with the same intensity, the same precision, the same thoroughness she brought to every task, completely and without reservation. Behind them, unattended, The fire burned down to coals, and the mountain stood in the night sky to the north. And Slathercone caught the last of the light on its east face, and held it a little longer than the rest. The week it took to close the bridge warden posting was a week of ordinary logistics made extraordinary by the particular quality of life when the horizon has shifted, and you are not dreading the shift but moving toward it. Reuben cleared the toll booth, filed the final ledger, locked the gate according to protocol, and handed the key to the rider who came down from the consortium with the formal contract termination. He packed his personal effects, clothing, books, the folded survey kit, and the one piece of furniture he cared about, which was his drafting stool, low and worn and fitted precisely to the angle of his back. On the last morning before the rider came, he stood on the bridge deck in the early light and looked upriver at the peaks. He had stood here 500 times and looked at these same peaks, and they had always been the same granite and ice and distance, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are permanent and do not require anything from you. They looked different now. He knew their names. Urzoth came out of the house behind the toll booth and stood beside him. She had the master map roll under her arm, the large one, the one with all 40 names annotated. She had come down from camp the night before and was going to ride south with him. The mule was loaded in the barn. "Ready?" she said. "Nearly," he said. He looked at the peak to the northeast, the one with the long west face. It was catching the first sun, and the light ran up the steep east face in a line. "Slathercone," he said quietly, trying the pronunciation with the soft stop she had corrected him on months ago on that north face shelf. "Better," she said, the way she had said it then. He smiled. "I have been practicing." She looked at the peak. After a moment she said, without drama and without ceremony, in Karak, a sentence, 3 or 4 words spoken quietly to the ranges. "What was that?" he said. "An announcement," she said. "That is a Karak custom. When something important changes, you tell the land. The land already knows, but saying it makes it real." "What did you say?" She looked at him with the full smile. The one he had learned was not freely given and was therefore always worth more than anything freely given. "I said his name is on the mountain, and he is going south with me, and the mountain should remember it." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about 14 months of a bridge and a ledger and an empty second room, and about the morning she had walked up to the gate with a Corrigan survey roll in her hands and the unhurried directness of someone who did not adjust themselves for anyone. "The mountain should remember it," he agreed. He took her hand, and they walked off the bridge together. The rider came an hour later to find the gate locked and the key in the envelope, exactly as the protocol required. The ledger was precise to the final entry. Everything was in order. They rode south through the long day with the mountains at their backs and the valley road ahead. And at midday, they stopped at a flat section of riverbank, where the graving ran wide and shallow over granite shelves, and ate from the provisions. Urzoth had packed hard bread and sharp cheese and dried fruit, and a flask of the mountain tea she made with the dried herbs she gathered in the higher elevations, which tasted like pine and something sweeter he had never been able to identify. The sun was high and warm, and the river sound was constant, and his horse and her mule both drank at the riverbank while they sat on the flat granite and ate, and did not talk much because there was a specific kind of comfortable between them by now that did not need filling. At some point, she unrolled a portion of the master map and set it on the rock beside them, not to work on it, just to have it out in the light. He looked at it and at the names written across it and at the peak in the northeast quadrant labeled in his hand and hers both. "In the studio," he said, "when we produce the formal publication, I want your name first on the title, The Doomhammer Survey." "Your name first, mine second." She looked at him. "That is not you started it," he said. 3 seasons before you ever crossed my bridge, you were out there building this record. I came in at the end and held stakes and wrote notes in a very neat hand. Your name goes first." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The Doomhammer Slater Survey." "Perfect," he said. "It is not perfectly symmetrical," she said. "The title is longer on one side." "The mountain named after me is not the tallest one in the range," he said. "I am at peace with asymmetry," she laughed. The river ran. Above them to the north, the peaks stood in the clean afternoon sky. "Tell me something," she said after a while. "Ask. When I crossed the bridge," she said. "The first morning you looked at my survey roll before you looked at the toll rate. You were going to talk to me about the map, whether I paid or not." "I was going to try," he admitted. "Why, I was a stranger." He thought about it honestly, the way she always seemed to expect of him. "You were carrying something I missed," he said. "I recognized it. I would have found a reason to talk about it." He paused. "Also, you were looking at the bridge the way you look at terrain you are studying, not the way someone looks at an obstacle. I wanted to know what you were seeing." "I was assessing whether the bridge was structurally accurate on the existing consortium map," she said. "It was not. It had been moved 60 feet west in the record, a beat. I noted the correction in my survey log." He stared at her. "You corrected the bridge's position on your first day in the range." "It was wrong," she said simply. He laughed and kept laughing for longer than was strictly necessary, and she watched him with the contained, pleased expression of someone who enjoys having said the exactly right thing. They arrived in Harwick 2 days later, in the late afternoon, with the low autumn sun turning the buildings gold and the mountain range still visible to the north, a line of peaks on the horizon that Reuben could now name. Harwick was a proper working town. 3 main streets, a weekly market, a consortium district office, 2 taverns, a smithy, a cartographer's materials supplier that he had looked up before leaving, and a row of commercial rentals on the second street that included, per the inquiry Urzoth had made by post 2 weeks prior, a ground-floor space with a north-facing window and a back room large enough for a drafting table. They went a look at it before they found a place to sleep, because some things do not wait. The space was everything the description had promised, and a little more wide-planked floors, good north light through the front window, the back room with space for 2 drafting tables and shelving along the full back wall. The woman who owned it was named Selma Hart, and she was a practical 60-year-old who had run the building for 20 years and had precisely one question about her potential tenants. "What is the business?" she said. "Cartographic survey studio," Reuben said. "Publishing and commissioned survey work, upper range emphasis. And both of you are doing it." "Yes," Urzoth said. Selma Hart looked at both of them. She had the eyes of someone who has seen a great deal and catalogued most of it. "The deposit is 2 months' rent," she said, "payable at signing. I will want a reference from a professional organization or a prior client." "Keldrath Consortium," Urzoth said immediately. "Regional Foreman Fark, and the Boundary Commission at Boreth Pass." "I can provide a letter of professional standing from the Aldous Fenwick studio in Vareth," Reuben added. "With my former master's seal." Selma nodded as though this were all perfectly ordinary, and it was because it was. "I can have the papers drawn up tomorrow morning," she said. "Will that suit?" "Yes," they both said. She looked at them both again with a slight dry expression. "There is a decent room available upstairs from my own house down the road," she said, "if you are looking for accommodation while you get settled. Clean, quiet, reasonable rate." "Thank you," Reuben said. They signed the rental agreement the next morning and moved in a week later. Urzoth's drafting table went under the north window. His went at the back wall. The master map of the Doomhammer Ranges was unrolled and pinned to the central wall of the studio, fully visible from both tables, full of names in 2 languages and 2 hands. He stood in front of it on the first full morning in the studio, with a cup of the pine something tea that he had learned to make to Urzoth's specification. She had shown him once and he had paid attention, and looked at the work they had done together. She came up behind him, already in her work clothes, the leather bodice laced precise as always, the charcoal shirt beneath it, the belt with the axe and the satchel, and stood at his shoulder with her own cup. "We need 3 more surveys to complete the northern range," she said. "Spring," he said. "We go back in spring." "Spring," she agreed. She reached past him and set one fingertip on the peak in the northeast quadrant. Slather Cone, the mountain with the long west face and the steep east, the name in her hand and the translation in his. "I named it right," she said quietly. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the map, not at him, and the morning light from the north window laid itself across the green of her skin and the black braid and the copper rings threaded through it. And she was precisely herself, exactly as she had been when she came across his bridge on a morning that had seemed like any other and had not been. "Yes," he said. "You did." She looked at him then, the full smile unhurried. He set down his cup and took her face in both hands, and she let him. And outside the north-facing window the mountain peaks stood on the horizon in the clear autumn sky, all of them named now, all of them present in the record. He kissed her in the middle of their studio, in the morning light, surrounded by the names of mountains in 2 languages. And she kissed him back the way she did everything completely, without reservation, with the full and deliberate attention of someone who has decided something and means it. And when they finally broke apart, she kept her hands where they were, braced flat against his chest, and rested her forehead against his. And they stood that way for a long time while the light moved across the floor and the mountains stayed where they were on the horizon. And the map on the wall held all the names they had made together, and the work that mattered was here, and the person who mattered was here, and there was nothing left that needed to be anywhere else. That evening they ate at the cookhouse down the street, a narrow place that smelled of wood smoke and bread. They sat across from each other at a small table and ate hot food and drank ordinary wine, and a few people from the neighboring tables glanced at them. The human man and the orc woman with the survey equipment, still dusty from the road, and Reuben looked back at anyone who stared with the comfortable absence of concern of someone who has nothing to justify. Urzoth had placed the folded draft of their first Harwick-based commission, a formal inquiry from the Boreth Pass Boundary Commission for a survey of the northern approach on the table beside her bowl. She was already thinking about the route. "The northern approach has 3 possible access lines," she said. "I know," he said. "I crossed 2 of them in the autumn of my first year here, before the bridge posting." She looked up from the draft. "You surveyed the Boreth approaches independently." "For my own record," he said. "I kept records of everything I crossed and walked, even when I was not being paid. Old habit from the studio." He reached into his jacket, the one with the worn inner pocket he always used for documents, and produced a folded oilskin. He set it on the table and unfolded it. It was a small, partial survey of the northern approach to Boreth Pass. 3 years old, slightly water-damaged at one corner, notated in his small, careful hand. She took it and looked at it. Her expression went through several things rapidly: professional assessment, surprise, something warmer. "You have the 3rd approach line," she said. "It is unstable in wet season," he said. "I noted it. Landslide risk on the lower 3rd. She set the survey down carefully. She looked at him across the table. "You have been surveying this range since before I got here," she said. "In my own time, yes, when I could afford the days away from the post. You were mapping the Doomhammer ranges before you knew me." "I did not know your name was the same as the ranges," he said. "I just knew the mountains were unmapped and I had a theodolite and leave days." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with the attentiveness that he knew, after months, meant she was adding something new to the picture she kept of him, adding it carefully, making sure it fit, because her pictures of things were accurate and she did not force them. "The map on our studio wall," she said. "You contributed more to that than stakeholding." "Some," he said. "Show me," she said. "When we go back to the ranges in spring, show me the routes you walked. I want to see what you saw before I got there." He looked at her. "Some of those routes are not in the formal survey. They are mine, personal." "I know," she said. "I want to see them anyway." He folded the oilskin back up and slid it across to her. "Keep it," he said. "For the commission file." She held it for a moment. Then she did something he had not seen her do before. She slid it inside the chest pocket of her bodice, close to her, where she kept the things that were important. He felt that more than he expected to. They finished dinner and walked back to Selma Hart's house in the cool evening, the mountains to the north lit silver by a nearly full moon, the peaks distinct and nameable. His hand was in hers and her step matched his without either of them adjusting for it. And the street was quiet, and the night was cold, and nothing was wrong anywhere. "Selma said we can have the upstairs room for as long as we need it," he said. "Or we find a proper house in the spring," she said, "when the survey contract comes in." "When," he said. "Not if. When," she said with certainty. "The work is good, it will be recognized." He looked at her profile in the moonlight. "I believe you," he said. "You should," she said. "I am usually right." He squeezed her hand once and she squeezed back, and they came to the door of the house and went inside. In the weeks that followed, the studio took shape. Shelves went up. The commission from Boreth Pass was accepted, and a second one came in a private land survey for a family called the Westons who were establishing a claim in the Upper Valley. The Doomhammer Slater name on the studio sign, which Reuben had painted himself in careful capital letters on a board of close-grained pine, became a recognized thing in the town quickly, because Harwick was a working place that respected good work. Urzoth delivered the consortium the completed Veth Bren North Face survey in final format, with all corrections incorporated, and all Karak names formally noted in the legend. Fark sent a written acknowledgement of receipt that was, for Fark, effusive 3 full sentences, the last one noting that the survey was the most complete range documentation in the consortium's northern records. Pelwick, from the regional office, wrote to say that the corrected Section 4B would be incorporated into all future consortium maps. He did not apologize for the contract review, but he was not the kind of man who apologized. Derek Voss and his brother Herrick were the subject of an ongoing consortium internal review. That was not Reuben's problem. He had submitted his affidavit, and that was the end of his part in it. On the first snow of winter, they closed the studio early and stood in the street in front of it and watched the mountains go white at the tops. The sign above the door Doomhammer Slater Survey Studio was already getting a dusting of snow along the top edge. "First snow means the high pass is close," Urzoth said. "We will not get back up to the northern approaches until March at earliest," he said. "I know." She looked at the peaks. "It is good surveying weather in the valley, though. Dry, clear, good visibility. I thought we might take the winter to finish annotating the second half of the master map," he said. "Complete the Karak index. Get it ready for publication." She looked at him. "You want to publish the full index?" "I want the record to exist," he said, "formally, in a published form that goes into the archive at Vareth and the consortium's reference library and the Boundary Commission's document office. 47 place names in the Doomhammer ranges correctly recorded with sources and translations." He paused. "That does not disappear, even if the consortium changes, even if the political situation changes. The record exists." She was very quiet. He watched the snow come down on the street, light and purposeful. "How long to complete it?" she said. 2 months of evening work," he said. "Maybe 3 if we are thorough." "We will be thorough," she said, as though there were no other option. They went inside out of the snow, and the studio was warm from the small iron stove in the corner, and the master map on the wall waited with its names in 2 languages, and they sat down at their respective tables and began. The nights when they worked late on the map were some of the best nights of Reuben's life, which he knew was an odd thing to say about what was essentially administrative documentation. But there was something in the rhythm of it, the careful back and forth of Urzoth speaking a name, and a story and Reuben writing it into the record with the precision it deserved. That was its own kind of intimacy. Not separate from the other kind, but existing alongside it, part of the same fabric. She knew these mountains the way she knew her own family. Each name she gave him came with a story, not always a long one, sometimes just a detail, the kind of detail that told you how many years of living it took to notice it. This peak caught the winter sun in a particular direction and was used as a navigation point in snowstorms. That valley had a spring that ran bitter because of the mineral content, and you did not drink from it. This ridge was where the Karak held their spring gathering when the weather allowed. He wrote all of it down. The proper name, the translation, the practical information, the story. Each entry was a full entry, not a code on a map. "When this is published," she said one evening, "will the Cartographic Council in Vareth accept a Karak name index as a legitimate survey addendum?" "I will make them," he said. She looked at him over the edge of her work. "The Aldous Fenwick studio still has standing with the council," he said. "Fenwick retired, but the accreditation passed to 2 of his former students. I know both of them. I will write letters. I will go to Vareth in person if necessary." He said it with the certainty that came from having decided something fully. "This publication will be registered and catalogued correctly. I will not let it be filed as a curiosity." "Reuben." "Yes, you are doing it again." "What?" "The thing where you make a large plan on my behalf without asking if I want your help making it." He stopped. He looked at her. She was watching him with that expression, not angry, not amused, but attentive, present, reading him. "Do you want my help?" he said. "Yes," she said, desperately. "I was just checking that you knew you were doing it." He started laughing again. She stood up from her table and came around to his, and sat on the edge of it in a way that meant she was done working for the evening, and leaned down toward him. And he put his hands on her waist and looked up at her in the lamplight with the full weight of how lucky he was sitting plainly on his face, which he no longer tried to manage or conceal. "Vareth in the spring, then," she said. "Before the passes open. Get the publication registered before we go back up to the ranges." "Vareth in the spring," he agreed. She kissed him slowly, with her hands on either side of his face, and outside the snow came down steadily on the mountains that had their names, and the studio was warm, and the map on the wall held everything they had built. Spring came, as it always does in mountain country, suddenly and without apology. 1 week of ice and the next week of snowmelt running in sheets off the peaks, the river loud with it, the valley floor turning from gray to pale green almost overnight. They went to Vareth in early spring, 2 weeks before the high passes cleared. It was Urzoth's first time in the city, and she walked through it with the same quiet, methodical attention she gave to new terrain, assessing, noting, not visibly impressed or unimpressed, just present. The Fenwick studio reception was cautious until Reuben showed his former master's letter of standing and spread the first section of the Doomhammer Slater master map on the presentation table. Then caution became attention, and attention became the specific, charged quality of professional people looking at something that is better than what they expected. The Cartographic Council reviewed the registration application over 3 days. There was one objection from a council member who questioned whether a Karak language name index qualified as a standard survey addendum under the current classification system. Reuben attended the review session and presented the methodology, the sourcing, the cross-referencing to existing common tongue maps, and the verification by independent survey. He was calm and precise, and he did not raise his voice once. Urzoth sat in the observer section of the council chamber and watched him work, and the expression on her face was one she had not worn in front of many people: open, proud, something that might in another context have been described as adoring if it were not also so clearly, characteristically self-possessed. The council approved the registration. The Doomhammer Slater Survey of the Northern Ranges, Volume 1. The Veth Bren Massif and Karak Place Name Index, registered to Urzoth Doomhammer and Reuben Slater, submitted for archive at Vareth in the 35th year of the Keldrath Charter. Reuben walked out of the council building into the spring afternoon and found Urzoth waiting for him on the steps. The city moved around them, merchants and students and laborers and riders, and the sky above the rooftops was clear and wide. She handed him a cup of something hot from a vendor across the square. "Well," she said. "Registered," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she tipped the contents of her cup carefully, a small controlled pour, onto the stone step of the council building, not wasteful, just deliberate in the Karak custom of marking a significant thing by action. "Now it is real," she said. He stood on the steps of the Cartographic Council with his own hot cup and the city all around him, and looked at the woman beside him. This specific, extraordinary, self-determining woman who had crossed his bridge with a survey roll in her hands and had walked into his life with the same direct precision she brought to everything, and who had stayed, and who had chosen, and who had named a mountain after him without entirely meaning to. Which was perhaps the most honest thing that had ever happened to him. "Let's go home," he said. She looked at him. "Harwick is a 17-day ride." "I know," he said. "Let's go," she smiled. "The full one, the mountain scale one." "You always want to go somewhere," she said. "I always want to go with you," he said. They walked down the steps together into the Vareth Spring, into the ordinary bustle of the city, and neither of them looked back at the building because the record was in there and it would stay, and that was enough. The ride back to Harwick took 16 days because the spring passes had cleared just enough, and they knew the terrain well by now. On the 14th day they came back into the upper Graven Valley, and Reuben saw the bridge from the ridge road above it, the Graven Bridge, with its new warden in the toll booth, a young man who waved up at the riders on the ridge without knowing who they were. Reuben looked at the bridge for a moment, at the booth where he had spent 14 months with a ledger and an empty second room, at the midpoint of the deck where he had first watched her stand above the river and look north at the peaks. "Do you miss it?" Urzoth asked beside him. He thought about it honestly. "Parts of it," he said. "The mountains from that particular angle, some of the people who crossed." He paused. "Not the loneliness." She said nothing, but her horse moved a half-step closer to his on the narrow ridge road. They came down from the ridge in the late afternoon and were in Harwick before dark. The studio was exactly as they had left it, the map on the wall, the stove cold, the two drafting tables each with their specific disorder of the person who used them. Reuben started the stove and Urzoth unpacked the mule, and by the time the room was warm, there was the particular smell of a real space inhabited again that no borrowed room ever quite achieves. She stood in front of the master map with the evening lamp behind her and looked at the whole of it, the full northern range in both languages, every peak and valley and drainage path named and annotated, the work of more seasons than it was tidy to count. He came to stand beside her. The map was almost complete. The southern approaches and the deep northwest section were still in draft work for the next survey season, which would begin in 3 weeks when the high-altitude snow finished melting. In the center of the map, Slathercone stood in the northeast quadrant with its long west face and its steep east face, and its name in her hand and the translation in his. "I want to go back to that peak," she said. "Before we start the new survey section, go back and stand on the north face shelf where you first asked me the names." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because the first time I named it," she said, "I was not entirely prepared to say what I was saying. I would like to go back and say it properly." He was quiet for a moment. "We will go the first week the pass clears," he said. "Good," she said. They went back in the first week of the upper range season, 3 weeks after returning from Vareth. The north face of Veth Bren in spring was a different landscape from the autumn. The snowmelt had made the lower slopes vivid green between the granite, and the high shelf where they had first sat, and named the peaks was clear and dry and warm in the midday sun. They did not bring the full survey equipment. They brought provisions and a notebook and the simple theodolite, because old habits did not die entirely, but mostly they went up the way you return to a place that matters. They sat on the same flat rock. The view was the same, the full northern range, peak after peak, known and named, the Vorzumal, the Doomhammer ranges, the permanent ice cap on Zerkoth, the distinct double ridge. And in the middle distance, Slathercone. Urzoth looked at the peak for a long time. The wind was soft and warm and the sun was at the angle that made the east face brilliant. Then she spoke in Karak, not a short phrase this time but a full sentence, deliberate and slow, in the resonant lower register her voice went to when she was saying something that mattered. He waited. She looked at him. "In Karak," she said, "when you name a landmark after a person, you are formally placing them in the land. You are saying this person belongs here. The land holds them now. She paused. I named that peak without thinking the first time. I am saying it properly now. She held his gaze directly. The land holds you, Reuben Slater. You belong in this range. You are named in it. He felt something in his chest that had been carefully structured against the cold for a very long time and had started month by month to give up its architecture, felt it finish giving. I belong here, he said, and meant the range and also the woman and also the specific, mapped, annotated, carefully documented life that they had built together in this mountain country. Yes, she said, simply, completely. He took her face in his hands, up on that high shelf with the whole range visible around them, and the open sky above them, and no roof, and no walls, and the wind soft on everything, and kissed her with the full force of a man who has been lonely for a long time and is not any more, who has been overlooked for a long time and is seen now completely by someone who chose to look. She kissed him back with her hands in his coat and the whole open sky above them, the world falling away to just this, the rock beneath them and the wind and the mountain they had named together, and the warmth of being exactly where you were supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, she stayed close, forehead against his, both of them breathing the cold mountain air, and below them the graven valley spread south in a band of silver and green, and north the ranges went on, named and present and held in the record. We still have 3 peaks to name in the northwest section, she said against his face. He laughed. Right now. Not right now, she said, and kissed him again, brief and certain and warm. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. They stayed on the high shelf until the sun moved west, and the shadow of Urzoth stretched long across the valley below. They ate from the provisions and talked about the Northwest Section survey plan, and about the Borhath Commission, and about the second volume of the range survey that would take another 2 seasons to complete, and about none of those things at all, which is the thing that the best conversations are also about. When they came back down the mountain in the late afternoon, the graven valley below them had the particular gold of late spring at elevation, warm and specific, and the peaks behind them held the light a little longer than the rest of the sky. Slathercone caught it last. The east face bright as a mirror, the west face already in shadow, the mountain that looked like 2 different things depending on where you stood, holding the last of the day's light on the steep side that only those who came around to look directly at it ever saw. The man who was more than he seemed from the front. The man she had named without thinking, and then with her whole heart. They walked down together in the mountain evening, his hand in hers, and the record was in the archive in Vareth, and the studio was in Harwick with the sign above the door, and the map was on the wall with all its names, and none of it was going anywhere. Reuben Slater had been a cartographer who asked an orc woman to name the mountains, and she had named one after him without thinking, and then she had spent a full season proving that she had meant it, and then she had said it properly on a high shelf of rock with the whole range as witness. That was the end of the story of how a bridge warden stopped being alone, and the beginning of everything else.